presidential and parliamentary elections are coming to Turkey in just a couple of days. On Sunday, more than 60 million people will vote on elections, and these elections will mean that either Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his AK party will remain in power after almost 20 years, or the opposition, the six parties, will get their chance to lead Turkey. Now, these elections are branded in Western media as historic, consequential, but let's see how Turkey, how people on the ground are thinking about these elections. Joining me now from Istanbul is Sinan Ülgen, who is a Carnegie visiting scholar, but also former Turkish diplomat, so someone who knows how the government functions from the inside. Sinan Ülgen, welcome to Program One.
Thank you very much.
I said that the Western media are branding these elections as historic, consequential, the most important elections probably in decades. Opposition is finally united. The six people around one table are speaking with one voice. They have their own candidate, Kılıçdaroğlu, who wants to win the presidency. They also hope that they will have a majority in the Grand National Assembly. But on the other side, Recep Tayyip Erdogan wants to win another term. So what is the situation on the ground? We are seeing a lot of verbal tensions, but also a lot of physical tensions, especially between people who are close to Erdogan and his party and the people who are close to Mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu.
Yes, this is quite an unprecedented political landscape in Turkey ahead of elections. Because when you look at the past 20 years, every time since 2002, Erdogan entered the election as the favorite. He was leading in the polls, his party was in government, so he was, in a way, it was not surprising for the election to turn to Erdogan's favor. This time around, however, it's very different. Erdogan is not anymore leading in the polls, and now it is more likely that we will witness a win by the political opposition led by Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu than a win by Erdogan. And this is, again, a very new parameter compared to the past 2 decades of Turkish politics. On Sunday, we will have twin elections, one vote for the presidential race and one vote for the parliamentary race. And if on Sunday, the outcome for the presidential race remains uncertain, and it can be if no candidate can get more than 50% of the popular vote, then we will go for the second round in 2 weeks' time, namely on the 28th of May. So that's the context. And there are 4 candidates running for the presidency. Lead candidate, according to the polls, is Kılıçdaroğlu, as discussed. Then he's followed very closely by Erdogan. And then there are 2 other small candidates. Their importance is that depending on the vote that they could ultimately get, they might force a second round. That's the importance of the 2 small candidates, Muharrem İnce and Sinan Ülgen. But right now, Kılıçdaroğlu seems close to the 50% threshold. But it is not yet sure, according to the polling results, whether he can actually cross that margin on Sunday, or whether the elections, the presidential elections, will have a second round in 2 weeks' time after Sunday.
Now, one of the key elements in these elections, as many people would say, could be one onion, which is almost key element of Kılıçdaroğlu campaign this time, because he sits often in his kitchen filming not so sophisticated videos, but talking about the economic situation in Turkey. And one piece which was published in The Economist just last week is talking about that, where they say that the lira has lost about 60% of its value against the dollar in the last 2 years. Also, the foreign investments are way, way less than it was probably a year or two or three or even a decade ago. How important that economic situation will be, because we know that the people, according to media reports, are not satisfied with Erdogan's politics at the moment when it comes to their livelihoods.
Yes, that's going to be the major factors that will weigh on the outcome of the elections. The fundamental reason why the political landscape that we have has emerged, namely where the opposition has a palpable chance of winning the presidency, is essentially because of the economic downturn. The macroeconomic mistakes that we witnessed by the government, and particularly also Erdogan's policy of trying to keep a very low interest rate, has essentially created a situation where inflation has shot up. At one point, it came close to triple digits. Now it's coming down a bit. But nonetheless, because of those inflationary pressures, the purchasing power of the ordinary citizen, the middle class, has greatly been eroded. And that's the fundamental reason why there is dissatisfaction with the performance of the Erdogan government. That has also turned into a support for the political opposition, because they promise a return to more conventional economics, and they have a more credible economic team to lead that transition. So yes, economics will be a major factor on Sunday, as people think about their purchasing power and their living standards.
Sinan, would you say that the opposition has at the moment maybe a key card in their sleeve in two people who were responsible for a good economic and political situation in times of Erdogan, in Ali Davutoğlu and Ali Babacan, who were key players in Erdogan's team, and then they left him also with the former president Abdullah Gül in the last few years, because when Babacan was the Minister of Economy, the economic situation in Turkey was much different than it's today.
Yes, correct. Ali Babacan, as the former economics minister, has credibility, given that he has steered Turkey's economic transition. However, he's not the only person that will be part of the new economic team. Ali Babacan will be, in all likelihood, if the opposition wins, namely a vice president, he will have a responsibility overall for the coordination of the economic portfolio. However, the line ministries, in particular the finance ministry and the treasury ministry, which will be two different ministries, will also have competent people. And here I think one needs to recall Bilge Yılmaz, who's the vice president of İYİ Party. He's a Wharton. He has a background in academia from Wharton, and he's also quite a competent person that can help to work with and establish the credibility of the new government in terms of its economic agenda, which will actually be very much needed given the rather difficult state of affairs.
But it seems like Erdogan doesn't have answer to that. So he's branding opposition, and I'm gonna quote from the same article in The Economist. he says that this election is a contest between proudly pious and nationalist Turks and a rabble of whiskey-sipping, godless, elitist, Kurdish separatists and sexual deviants, with all slavishly seeking to embrace important Western values. Is this because he's afraid of their knowledge and their capabilities, or because he doesn't have in his team people who could solve his problems? And we saw that he's changing the heads of central bank and Ministry of Finance and Ministries of Economics all the time, trying to solve this situation with inflation.
Well, when you look at the campaigning in Turkey, especially on the government side, there is a heavy focus on cultural divisions. So Erdogan has been using these arguments, identity politics, cultural cleavages, to quite surprisingly, in a surprisingly effective manner in the past. So that's always been part of his campaign strategy, to emphasize, the different cleavages, whether it's the secular conservative cleavage, or in particular the secular conservative cleavage. So right in this current campaign as well, there are elements of this identity politics, cultural politics. However, this time around, the background situation is different. We have discussed it a little bit. People are less interested nowadays in these type of cultural identity arguments, and they're more interested to hear about concrete proposals about how the government side or the opposition side will enhance the Turkish citizens' living standards, how they will address the structural problems of the Turkish economy. And there, the opposition has done a better job, not only in terms of the potential leadership, the economic leadership team that they have announced, but also in terms of disclosing quite a comprehensive policy agenda, which has a heavy focus on economic reform. And that is going to be quite instrumental on Sunday.
One of the key elements in all of this is also a foreign policy. We know that Erdogan doesn't have a good standing when it comes to Europe. He's in often clashes with the United States when it comes to situation in foreign policy, but he's very close to Putin and Russia. And on the issue of Ukraine, he plays a double-sided role, helps a bit Ukraine, but also helps to Russia. How important foreign policy will be in this election?
Foreign policy will be less important. It's going to be mostly about the economic agenda. However, foreign policy still has a critical role to play, where particularly on the campaign that we see from the Erdogan side, there are elements of foreign policy that are being used to illustrate the ambition that Turkey is already a major player globally, that Erdogan is an international leader that weighs on regional and international problems, that he is being well respected by the international community. So we see more of the foreign policy agenda, and perhaps justifiably so, since they have been in government, on the side of AK Party and Erdogan, and less really on the side of the opposition.
What could be the major Achilles heel for the opposition in this election? What is their worst side or weakest side in election? What could damage their chances to win these elections?
Well, perhaps the most the most detrimental aspect of the opposition's structure is that in order to win, they also need the support of the pro-Kurdish HDP. That is how Kılıçdaroğlu, if he's going to win, is going to get there. He needs to rely on that Kurdish vote. However,
sorry to interrupt you. Selahattin Demirtas, who's in jail for the last, if I'm not wrong, 2 years, said in an interview with the Western media that he hopes that he will be released soon from jail if opposition wins. Does that send the message to the Turkish voter that they should vote for opposition in these elections?
It does, but there is more to it. The pro-Kurdish HDP has already declared its support to Kılıçdaroğlu. So there is already a very clear commitment on the side of the pro-Kurdish HDP. However, that support is also a weak point for the opposition because the government is criticizing the opposition for being too close to a party where the PKK, which is a terrorist entity, still has influence. And that's been an argument that's been quite effective in distancing the more nationalist constituencies who dislike this type of association for understandable reasons. That's perhaps the weakest, if you want, structural component, structural element of the opposition campaign. And then, of course, the fact that ultimately the elections will not be carried out in a fair environment. What I mean by that is that the ruling party is able to rely on state resources. The state institutions, especially the High Electoral Board, have a tendency to rule in favor of the government party if it comes to that. So these are also some of the negative elements that will impact the result on Sunday.
I have two more questions. One is, what will be the role of media in all of this when it comes to election campaign? We know that AK Party and Erdogan, they have a huge control over media, and that there is a very small number of, or even non-existent opposition or nationally present media at the moment.
Yes, the media situation, or more generally, the information ecosystem that has now emerged in Turkey, is a major advantage for Erdogan and the ruling party, because it has created an ecosystem that's been very open to disinformation, where the both state-owned channels but also pro-government channels have been essentially being part of this politically motivated information campaign, and that's been quite important for the ruling party to still keep a high degree of support. It remains to be seen whether it's enough, but nonetheless a high degree of support, even under adverse conditions like the economic difficulties that we've discussed. So that's a key element in their campaign strategy. However, one also needs to add that especially for the younger generation, that traditional media is not anymore very powerful as it used to be, because youth does not anymore sit in front of TV watching the evening news and then the talk shows after that. They have a different habit in terms of how they want to consume news and information, particularly towards social media and digital media. And that's the area where we see, the more dynamic elements, components of the information ecosystem, where people can get different views and be exposed to different views, which is not the case anymore for the government-controlled media.
And my last question is, we know that here in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but in Balkans, Turkey has really strong relations with the Bosniak population, and a leader of the major Bosniak party in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bakir Izetbegovic, have called on people with Bosniak ancestry in Turkey to vote for Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his AK party. But how important that support from countries like Bosnia could or could not be for Erdogan and his party?
Well, at this point, every bit of support counts because it's going to be a close race. However, when actually viewed from the standpoint of the Turkish electorate, I don't think that it is the job of foreign leaders to call for this type of very clear support for one candidate over the other. Because imagine the scenario where if the opposition wins, then the opposition will then have this memory of how this type of interference has happened during the this very critical electoral period, and I think this is not this is going to be remembered when that day comes. So I think for the foreign leaders, they can certainly call for, in this case, Turkish citizens of Bosnian descent or with affiliation in Bosnia to vote in Turkish elections. But to tell them who to vote for, that's a step too far.
Sinan Ülgen, thank you so very much for your time and for this interview.
Hvala lepo.